Hello, everyone, and welcome to another track guide for the IRO4. This week, we visit Circuit de Catalunya, Barcelona for the first ever time in the IRO4. And for me, it's my first ever time running laps at Barcelona on iRacing, these very track guide laps, in fact. So I'm very much looking forward to the challenge of learning this track more intimately throughout the week. That said, it's actually more technical than I was expecting in the IRO4. I think overtaking is going to be quite difficult. Turn one seems like the only clear overtaking opportunity. I think it's going to race pretty similarly to Hungaroring, if you remember how things are there. Essentially, turn one is the main overtaking opportunity at Hungaroring as well. Also happens to be an F1 circuit. Surprise, surprise. But before we dive into the lap, I do just want to say that if you could click that subscribe button, if you want to get notified when I come out with videos like this in the future, please do so now. It also helps me know that you're enjoying the content and that it's useful for you. We're also running an F4 league on Thursdays called the Alt F4 Racing League. There's a link in the description below if you're interested in joining that league and racing with me and other clean, respectful F4 drivers. That's kind of the goal. Let's have a clean, respectful race and have a good time doing it. Also, if you're interested in any sim equipment, like gloves, for example, please visit Muradness.com and you can use the promo code ELGATO for a 5% discount at checkout. I think that's all the shameless plugs. So, yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the lap before we dive into the details corner by corner. Before we get started, let's take a look at our track conditions. We have a 24 degrees Celsius track with 24-degree air temperature and moderately low usage at 37%. I do also want to point out the wind direction this week. This main straight heads south-southwest, so if you have a south or southwest blowing wind, you will be getting pushed from the wind down this main straight, so you'll have a little bit higher top speed. Because this is a northerly wind, it probably hurt us a little bit going down this main straight, but just keep that in mind for your lap times. As for our lap times, well, we did a first little stint and put it into the wall. So then we had to get a full tank of fuel, and these laps 5 down to 17 are that full tank of fuel. We're going to look at this final lap, this 1:44.488. I will admit that I did struggle here to get in clean laps and to find my pace. Eventually, I started finding a rhythm, but this is my first trip to Barcelona in any car on iRacing, so it did take me a moment to really gather myself up. I suspect that lap times will actually be down in the 43s in these conditions. Once I'm able to get used to the track and driving it, but also when really fast people with a lot of experience show up here, I think think easily we'll see laps in the 43s, so I don't think this is going to be a particularly quick lap in terms of top times for the week. Um, you will also see that this lap still is a little scruffy in places. I will point out where we are a little scruffy, but I think it is good enough to talk about. So let's go ahead and dive in. Turns 1 and 2 make up a chicane with a tight entry and fairly open and fast exit. We're also exiting into a fairly fast sweeping corner in turn 3 where we can use the exit speed, so our goal here is to slow enough in the early part of the chicane to allow us to get back to throttle early for a nice quick exit. We can start by braking heavily right around the 100 board, and our goal here is to apex slightly late and sacrifice some of our entry speed to allow us to open up the entry for turn 2 so we can get a quick exit out of the chicane. As we head for the turn 1 apex, we'll trail off the brakes and we want to be careful to avoid the anti-cut curbing so we don't unsettle the car. We want to have all our braking done as we get to the turn 1 apex so we can commit back to throttle when we get there, and we'll look to do so fairly aggressively. If we're carrying too much speed when we get to the first apex, we won't be able to commit to throttle because we'll still be wrestling the car to keep it tight. So it's very important to slow the car enough from the time we get on the brakes up to the apex to allow us to get back to throttle. As we commit back to throttle for the first apex, we'll want to quickly shift our attention up the road to the second apex and start to prepare for our direction change. We're aiming to meet up with the turn 2 apex curbing as soon as the red and white stripes start, and we'll look to let the car naturally drift out to the far end of the track as we go through the corner and look to use all of the available space on exit. Turn 3 is a long and fast right-hander that starts just after we exit turn 2. Because the corner is so long, we really want to focus on using the available grip in the IRO4 to allow us to run a tight line that reduces tire scrub and distance traveled. For the most part, the corner is flat out on warm tires, but right around mid-corner you'll start to feel the car begin to understeer. Right when the car starts to understeer, we want to briefly lift off throttle to set the weight of the car forward just enough for the fronts to grip and allow the rear to rotate so we can hold our tight line. If you can anticipate the understeer and do this just before it happens, that's even better. If we don't lift here, the car will continue to understeer and wash out towards the outside of the track, ultimately costing us time from tire scrub and traveling a further distance. As we continue through the corner, we can now let the car naturally drift out to the side of the track on exit as we continue to maintain our turning arc and carry as much speed as we can on exit heading down towards turn 4. Turn 4 is another long corner that sends us 180 degrees back in the other direction, and the radius in the second half of the corner opens up slightly so we can get the car in tight at a slightly later apex, then use the extra space on exit to handle early throttle application. We'll start by braking right as we pass under the bridge and start turning in for the apex as we approach the end of the black and yellow curbing. We'll trail off the brakes as we head for the apex, and as we get to the apex curbing and the car starts to settle down, we can get back to throttle aggressively to use all that space on exit. As we come through the latter half of the corner, we can let the car drift out to the left as we accelerate off the apex. But we will look to keep the car roughly center of the track as we do so to reduce our distance traveled and help set us up for an easier approach to turn 5. Turn 5 is a tricky left-hander that tightens up on exit. Because we're turning in while heading downhill, the car will naturally want to understeer and wash out towards the outside of the track on exit. We also don't have a great braking reference, and the apex is somewhat blind at first, so there's a lot working against us. That said, we're limited on entry speed because we're heading downhill and have a tightening exit, so we're looking for a late apex to maximize our exit speed. As I mentioned, there really isn't a great braking marker, so I'm keeping my eyes at the apex, and as soon as the curbing starts to come into view just a little bit, I start braking. We want to brake in a straight line early on to slow the car as we wait for the later turn in, and once the apex curbing comes completely into view and we can spot our late apex, we can commit to turning in and trailing off the brakes. As we get to the apex curbing, we want to use a step throttle to help balance the car and begin to accelerate through the corner, first going to about 60% before committing to 100% full throttle as the exit curbing comes into view. On exit, we want to use as much of the curbing as necessary while staying in contact with the red and white curbing to avoid an off track. Turn 6 is this fast, flat out kink, so there really isn't much to say. Turn 7 is another tricky corner where we're dealing with some elevation changes as we head across the track in the entry of the corner and through the corner on exit. The exit also leads directly into the turn 8 kink, which really isn't much of a corner but does throw an anti-cut curb into the mix, so we can't be too wide on exit. Initially, the camber in turn 7 makes it feel like we can carry more entry speed through the apex than we can, but the car has a tendency to understeer on entry here, and as we crest the camber on exit, it's very easy to wash out too far wide, so we actually need to be quite patient on entry. We can start braking right around the beginning of the curbing and turn in around midway for a slightly later turn in and apex. We want to trail off the brakes pretty early here and coast the car into the apex as we come over the crest into the camber. I found that trying to trail too deep into the corner and over this crest would cause the front tires to become overloaded and lead to a lot of understeer on entry and thus a lot of problems on exit. As the car settles into the camber and meets up with the apex, we want to look up the road to the anti-cut curbing at turn 8, and we can get back on throttle and fairly aggressively as soon as we know we're set up to just barely avoid those. As we exit turn 7, we can run all the way out to the exit curbing as we head for the turn 8 kink, and we're simply looking to avoid touching the yellow anti-cut curbs as we let the car drift back over to the left side of the track on exit as we head down towards turn 9. Turn 9 here is a super fast right-hander, but our approach is somewhat similar to the very long turn 3 we had earlier in the lap. We can keep it almost completely full throttle, but if we do that, we'll run wide on exit, so we need a slight lift mid-corner to once again send the weight of the car forward to help with front grip and allow the rear of the car to rotate around. We can follow the entry curbing and start to turn in as it comes to the end with our eyes looking in the distance for the apex. We're looking to get as close to the yellow anti-cut curb as we can, and we'll use that as our cue to lift off and help the car rotate as we get there. On this lap, I was a touch too brief and aggressive with the lift, and I didn't give the car quite enough time to rotate, and we can see the end result. I had to make further throttle corrections later on in the corner to avoid running wide on exit, which ended up costing more time than if I'd lifted a little bit longer at the apex. In general, any corrections on exit are going to be more costly the further along they happen. On exit, we want to use all of the curbing as we look to extend the track, careful to stay in contact with the red and white part to avoid an off track. Turn 10 is a slow corner with a tight and tricky exit, so we're looking for a lot of braking early on and a later apex that helps set us up to handle the tricky exit more easily. We can start braking right around the 100 board, and we're going to be braking at peak pressure for a while as we wait for our later turn in. We can start turning in right around the 50 board and begin to trail off the brakes as we head for the late apex, and we need to be careful not to be too sudden on our inputs here because it can be very easy to either lose the rear of the car or understeer by overwhelming the front tires. As we head towards the apex, we need to be patient to allow the car to continue to rotate, and we want to move our eyes out to the exit curbing. As we reach the apex with our eyes up the road at the exit curbing, we can start to get back on throttle using our orientation to the exit curbing as our reference point to make sure we aren't going to run wide on exit. If you take too much speed into the apex, you may need to delay throttle application here to allow the car to continue to rotate. As we head towards the exit curbing, we're looking to use all of it that we can and brush right up to the yellow anti-cut curbing without actually mounting it for a nice smooth exit. Turn 11 is this flat out left-hander, and the only real thing to consider here is how it sets us up to take turn 12. We want to use all of the red and white curbing, but not cut the corner any further because there are bumps that can cause the car to become unsettled. As we come through the exit, we want to continue our arc to open up for turn 12. Turn 12 is another 180-degree corner, so we'll have a somewhat familiar approach here that we used in earlier corners. Starting at turn 11, we want to aim to open up our entry as much as possible before lightly braking to help the car rotate as we turn in and aim to hug the apex curbing. You'll see that we actually do quite a bit of coasting here because our goal is to once again hug that inside curbing until we're ready to commit back to throttle. Braking any more than this and we'll overslow, and adding any throttle here will start to push us away from the exit curbing. We want to keep our eyes looking as far through the corner as we can, and as we approach the yellow anti-cut curb, we can commit back to throttle aggressively, initially getting to 80% before we commit back to 100% as the car tracks out on exit. On exit, we want to use all of the available curbing that we can while keeping our right tires in contact with the white line so we avoid getting an off track. Turn 13 is a fairly tight right-hander that exits downhill, so the car wants to understeer on exit, which means we're somewhat limited in how much rotation we can get on exit, and it can be very easy to run too wide. On exit here, we also want to get back to the right very quickly to open up for the chicane that's coming up, so we need to consider this with our approach. With that in mind, we're looking to get a lot of our rotation done early in the corner and to continue that arc all the way through the exit, so we're looking for a slightly later apex. We can start braking right after the yellow curbing comes into view or as we approach the square sign on the left, and we're aiming to use as much of the apex curbing as we can and get as close to the yellow anti-cut curbing as we can without touching it. As we get to the later apex, we can commit back to throttle, and as we come through the corner, we want to follow that entry curbing as much as possible to hold a tight line on exit, making our approach to the upcoming chicane a little easier. On this particular lap, we left a fair bit of margin at the apex, so we left some time on the table here, but even still, our exit line was tight enough to allow us to set up for the chicane. Turns 14 and 15 make up the final chicane that ultimately leads us onto the main straight, so we're flat out from the exit here into turn 1. That makes this exit incredibly important, and with that in mind, we want to focus all our efforts on exiting turn 15 as smoothly and as quickly as possible so we can carry as much speed back down the main straight as we can. To start with, we need to take turn 14 in a way that allows us to open up for turn 15 as much as possible and commit back to throttle. as early as possible, so we're looking for a late apex in turn 14. We can start braking right at the beginning of the entry curbing, and we want to be patient, waiting for turn in until we know we can stay fairly tight on exit, aiming to clip the later bit of the yellow anti-cut curb. As soon as we get to the apex, we can start to feed the throttle back in to about 50% and maintain that as we transition back towards turn 15. Through turn 15, we can maintain this throttle, and as we exit, we can look to ramp it up to 100% as soon as we know we won't run over the anti-cut curbing on exit. On exit, we want to use all of the red and white curbing without touching this yellow anti-cut curbing. One thing I plan on experimenting with here is a slight lift for turn 15 to help with rotation and allow us to get back to full throttle a little bit earlier, so it may be something you want to try out as well, because there may be a little bit of time available there. You can also see that I just barely touched the anti-cut curb on this lap, which then pulls the car out wide, which highlights why we want to avoid it. On this lap, I don't think it costs us very much, but there is some time lost here. Turn 16 is easily flat out as we head back onto the main straight to complete our lap here at Barcelona. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Per usual, I guess I didn't mention at the beginning of the video that if you haven't come and hung out with me on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/elgato con la pipa. That's another thing that's linked in the description below if you're interested, as well as the telemetry for this lap on Garage 61. So if you're interested in comparing your telemetry to mine to see what they look like side by side, lots of great things down in the description below. So check it out down there. But as always, I appreciate you all for watching, for commenting, giving any feedback, the likes, subscribes, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, until I catch you next week, good luck in your races here at Barcelona. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.